All right, folks, welcome to Radio American Studies. We're going to try to cover the topic of McCarthyism today, even though we can't be together because of this coronavirus thing. There's no reason not to have a little fun with history during your day. Topic, as you're going to see, is McCarthyism. And the guy that it's named after is the fellow that you're seeing in the picture right here. His name's Joseph McCarthy. We're going to talk about him as we go through. This is another one of those topics that fits into that post-war period. This one's got a lot to do with the Cold War, that battle between the Soviet Union and the United States that was going on at this time. And so let's get to it. Let's see how this works. So I've got a definition here for you of McCarthyism. McCarthyism, the practice of making accusations of subversion or treason, without proper regard for evidence. Basically, you're accusing somebody of something with no proof. Now that's probably something that's happened to a lot of us at different times. The seriousness of this was that it surrounded communism. This period of time in our history is known as the Second Red Scare. If you remember, way back in the 1920s, when Russia turned into the Soviet Union, there was a first Red Scare with A. Mitchell Palmer and some of the folks who were going up and rounding up Americans who were communist in different places and arresting them, causing them trouble, even though there's nothing illegal in the Constitution about being a communist. You know that because you at least read the Constitution last night before you went to bed. I would suggest maybe going to 2, possibly 3 readings a day because you've got the extra time that's out there. You really get to spend some good time with that. Matter of fact, if you will take a picture of yourself reading the Constitution, a little Constitution selfie, post it on Twitter, Instagram, or email it to me. I'll hook you up with some American Studies bucks when we come back to school. But basically, this guy, Joseph McCarthy, is going to take advantage of the people of the United States being really freaked out about the Cold War, and we're going to see why in a second, but using that to get an immense amount of power. You see here on the left side of your screen this ad. It's a propaganda piece, kind of like what we were seeing in World War II, but this one is about the Communist Menace. The term red becomes a slang term for somebody who was a communist, and so people got really tore up after World War II. That communists were operating inside of the United States. Chances are they probably were. There's a great show that ran on FX for 5 seasons called The Americans that did a nice job of showing a couple who was hidden in Washington, D.C., just kind of in plain sight spying for the Soviet Union. 1949, though, what is going to happen is the balance of power in the world is going to shift again. We had been the only country for about 4 years that had atomic weapons. Well, in 1949, the Soviets will detonate their first atomic bomb. So instead of us being the only people with this weapon out there, now we've set up that mutually assured destruction that we've talked about. You've got both sides that have these terrible weapons now. They're going to start to produce them in ever-increasing numbers. And so an advantage that we would have had over the Soviets is now gone. As you can see a little further down, in 1950, Klaus Fuchs, one of the guys who'd been part of the Manhattan Project, actually confesses to spying for the Soviet Union during that Manhattan Project era. He'll be arrested. He was in Britain at the time, thrown in prison for several years before he's released. He goes to East Germany and then eventually joins the Soviet Party there in the Soviet Union. 1949, we also have a huge blow because our ally from World War II, China, is going to undergo a communist revolution. It's a cool period of history, maybe something to check out. We're going to see a little bit with the Chinese when we talk about the Korean War. But if you're interested, Chairman Mao Zedong is going to bring communism to China. It's kind of an interesting story seeing how that would work. Just the sheer number of people, though, and the idea that now you've got what we assumed was going to be a really good relationship between the Soviets and the Chinese that we're worried about as we're trying to get people to join Team Democracy. This is an ally joining Team Communism, and so it doesn't end up working out quite that way. The two sides don't get along really well. But that was another thing people were scared about. 1950, the Korean War is going to start, our first big conflict after World War II, and we'll see a little bit more about that tomorrow. But that's another thing kind of on people's minds. It's a war against communism. And then finally, in 1950, you've got a couple named the Rosenbergs, an American couple who are arrested for spying for the Soviets. They're charged with treason. And eventually both of them executed. And so there comes to be this idea in the United States of anybody could be working for the communists. There was no really way to tell. It could be your neighbors, it could be your boss, and so people became very suspicious of each other. In response to some of this, the House of Representatives is going to form a committee that is going to start to investigate. It is the House Committee on Un-American Activities, or the HUAC, and it is they're going to investigate different charges that communists are infiltrating all parts of American society. One of the places they're going to focus on, as you see in those pictures on the right, is Hollywood. They were worried that communists were trying to sneak their messages into movies, television shows, and so you have actors, actresses, directors, writers, producers who are accused of being communist and pretty much ends their careers. They would be put on kind of an unofficial, what becomes known as the Blacklist, and the Blacklist basically meant that nobody was going to work for them. They weren't going to get hired to write movies or act in movies, things like that. One of the most famous people to be accused of being a communist is actually Lucille Ball, the lady from the I Love Lucy episode we watched late last week. And her husband, Ricky, actually testified for her at one of these hearings and says that the only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and she dyes that. And so she escapes some of the consequences there. If you look at that picture on the left, basically people are called in front of Congress to testify about these activities they're being accused of doing. Imagine how nervous that would make you if you were called in front of Congress to answer for these things that you hadn't done. And there's a willingness on the part of a lot of these people to give names to kind of throw other people onto the bus to take the pressure off them, which obviously isn't very productive, but maybe one of those things that you can understand.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda. Mr. Thomas takes an impartial stand in his opening talk.
I want to emphasize at the outset of these hearings that the fact that the Committee on Un-American Activities is investigating alleged communist influence and infiltration in the moving picture industry must not be considered or interpreted as an attack on the industry itself, nor should our investigation be interpreted as an attack on the majority of persons associated with this great industry. I have every confidence that the vast majority of movie workers are patriotic and loyal Americans.
A long list of prominent motion picture witnesses appear before the committee. Speaking for the films, Eric Johnston, president of the Motion Picture Association, talks frankly concerning the attitude of the producers.
We're accused of having communists and communist sympathizers in our employ. Undoubtedly, there are such persons in Hollywood, as you will find elsewhere in America. But we neither shield nor defend them. We want them exposed. We're not responsible for the political or economic ideas of any individual, but we are responsible for what goes on the screen. We guard that with great care. If communists have attempted to inject their propaganda into the motion picture, they have failed miserably. We will never permit them to succeed.
So you can see there a newsreel talking about this controversy there in Hollywood. If you're interested, the Hollywood 10 is another topic that you might want to explore. Give you some names of some who back then would have been fairly famous people in the movie industry who are put on that Hollywood blacklist and eventually, like I said, never get to work in the film industry again. As you can see on what I've got pulled up here, Joseph McCarthy, February 9th, 1950, he's going to become one of the most famous men in America when, during a Senate hearing, he is going to stand up and say the following: the State Department, that's the part of our government that controls our interaction with other countries, is infested with communists. I have here in my hand a list of 205. A list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department. Now imagine how nervous we would feel today if we thought that there were people, agents of a foreign government trying to interfere with our interactions for other countries. You can see a little bit of that after 2016 in the investigation into Russian meddling into the election. Some of this stuff that's been happening since. This was terrifying. For a lot of Americans. This isn't Hollywood. This isn't the entertainment industry. These are the people that are supposed to be advancing the interests of the United States around the world that are now being accused of doing this sort of thing. Now, who is Joseph McCarthy? Joseph McCarthy was the junior senator from Wisconsin. If you remember, there are 100 senators, 2 from each state, and the one who has been there the least amount of time is the junior senator. The Senate is one of those places where the longer you're in it, the more power you get, the better committees you get on, the more influence that you have. A guy like Mitch McConnell from the state of Kentucky has been in the Senate 30 some odd years, and so has worked his way all the way up to being the majority leader in the Senate. So as a junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy's not going to have a ton of power. He gets elected by touting his service in World War II. He refers to himself as Tail Gunner Joe. And a tail gunner was one of the most dangerous jobs you could have on an airplane. So it was implying a lot of bravery on his part. You see the image that's there on the screen. That would have been something he would have used in his campaign. Would have been something that really, connected with a lot of those voters, especially those guys that served in World War II that knew just what a dangerous job that was. So he comes back, gets himself elected to the Senate. Problem is he doesn't have a ton of power. Like I said, being a first-term senator there, you're not going to have a lot. His frustration leads him to make this outrageous claim that there are. He's got a list in his hand with 205 names. Problem is, he's the only one that sees that list. He's the only one that knows that list. But he starts the Senate having some of these hearings. There is a Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations that he's going to work with. And you could make an argument from 1953 to 1956, Joseph McCarthy is the first or second most powerful man in the United States. People definitely tuned in to see what these accusations were that he was making. It was really a struggle, him or President Eisenhower, who's going to have the most power. He's going to look for communists. They're also going to look for homosexuals during this period of time. So trying to find those people, and a lot of times in the government, homosexuality is illegal in a lot of places in the 1950s, and so the idea was that if you were homosexual, then if Russia or somebody found out about it, they could use that to blackmail you. And so that was kind of the way that they went after those folks was that they were a security risk. So Joseph McCarthy is going to go around accusing people of this. By most accounts, he's making all of it up. He doesn't have this list of names. He is counting on the terror that is going to come from these accusations. So that's where we get back to that idea of McCarthyism as something that making accusations to gain power, but accusations that don't really have any merit. There's nothing behind them. He finally runs up against a somebody who's willing to fight back. In the middle part of the 1950s, he has an aide who is drafted into the military. Doesn't want to lose the aide, and so basically he tries to throw a little weight around at the Pentagon. The Pentagon tells him no, that he's not going to be able to get his person out of there, and he basically says, "Well, I'll show you guys." And so he calls in the military and says, "I've got a list of so many people in the Army that I know to be communist," and basically the Army is ready to call his bluff. Say, "Okay, show us." And very quickly it unravels. It's pretty evident to everybody that he doesn't have any proof, and it leads to him being humiliated. He's censured by the Senate, which basically means he's not allowed to speak on the Senate floor. I like to think that everybody kind of covered their eyes when he walked past, or if he tried to talk, they put their fingers in their ears and said, "No, no, 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 not listening." Probably didn't really happen that way. That's why I wouldn't make a very good senator, because I would do things like that. But the Army McCarthy hearings kind of destroy his power. One of the famous lines that comes from those hearings is this charge of "Have you no decency, sir, at long last?" As the American public is watching, they see this mythical figure of Joe McCarthy basically being dressed down by a defense lawyer. And so let's see that clip.
Mr. Chairman. May I say that Mr. Welch talks about this being cruel and reckless. He was just baiting. He has been baiting Mr. Cohen here for hours, requesting that Mr. Cohen, before sundown, get out of any department of the government anyone who is serving the communist cause. Now, I just give this man's record, and I want to say, Mr. Welch, that it has been labeled long before he became a member, as early as 1944.
Senator, may we not drop this? We know he belongs to the Lawyers Guild. And Mr. Cohen nods his head at me. I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cohen.
No, sir.
I meant to do you no personal injury. And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
I know this hurts you, Mr. Welch.
I'll say it hurts.
May I say, Mr. Chairman, as a point of personal privilege, I'd like to finish this.
Senator, I think it hurts you too, sir.
I'd like to finish this. I know Mr. Cohen would rather not have me go into this.
Probably would have been better off not going into it. Like I said, he's censured by the Senate. Eventually goes home and dies fairly quickly. Becomes starts to drink very heavily, and will eventually die within just a couple of years. So this guy that had all this power, now that power's gone. One more thing, you knew I couldn't get through one of these things without at least saying something that's available in the film library. This film, The Majestic, is a fantastic look at this idea of McCarthyism. It's not Joseph McCarthy, it's a little earlier. It's that House Committee on Un-American Activities, but you get to see what one of those hearings might have looked like. It actually stars Jim Carrey. It's kind of a serious role for him, but it's really, really good. He plays a Hollywood screenwriter who's blacklisted. When he's blacklisted, he gets in an accident, loses his memory, washes up in this town where he looks an awful lot like a young man who went missing in action in World War II. And so the town kind of adopts him. He rebuilds an old movie theater there. That's where the name of the film comes from. Before eventually his past kind of catches up with him. It's a great film. I've got a copy in the film library. That doesn't help us since we're all locked out of the film library. But I did do a search. It is on Vudu, which is one of those streaming apps. And you can get it for free if you'll watch it with ads. So you can get it for free with ads. I think you could rent it for $3 as well. But really, really good. Maybe you could find it somewhere else too. I don't know where you people do your illegal movie downloading, but might be something to check out if you're interested. Just a little bored. It'd give you a good view of what's there. Also, wanted to say I sent you an email. Mrs. Slayton did us a great service. She sent the link out to a streaming service that's available to all Scottsburg High School students. It's there in your email. If you click on it and go in, there's tons of stuff that's there in the film library. Just really good movies that are there. If you want to know if it's in the film library, that list is on your links to resources on the American Studies page, and you can take a look there. If you click on each one of them, and it'll tell you, take you to IMDb, and show you a little bit of what the movie's about. So there you go. Hopefully, I don't have a chance to get good at this. I would much rather be there with you guys, telling dumb jokes, sharing goofy stories from my life, making Mrs. Bray roll her eyes as we try and do this in person. But just to kind of get these last couple of post-war topics in, this is attempt number 1. So this is McCarthyism. We'll get to the Korean War tomorrow. So hope you enjoyed it. Shoot me a comment, an email, or on that Remind app for suggestions or to let me know what you thought. If you've got questions, same thing. So there you go. Have a lovely afternoon.